Now we have a post-mortem for Roman's Adventure coming to us from Oasis.
This is my post-mortem for Roman's Adventure. This post-mortem is more directed towards first-timers, people not too confident about their programming skills or whatever skills you might bring to a game, because I definitely wasn't when I started. A little bit about it. It's a top-down-ish adventure game. It was pitched originally September 25th. It was released on December 11th. Fortunately, it released on time. I forgot to include on the slide a little bit about myself. I've spent a good 14 or 15 years in the IT field as a sysadmin or a network admin. But as far as coding goes, really only about 2-3 years off and on, just on my own, working on tutorials, doing some sample games here and there on the Unity board, or finding some sort of Udemy tutorial to go through just to kind of get my feet wet a little bit. So definitely very exciting, but also very scary because one, I had pretty much zero experience in JavaScript outside of Chris's tutorial, which I had done maybe a month beforehand. So any JavaScript knowledge that I had gotten was quickly starting to fade away as time went on. So kind of went into it just not really knowing what to expect. So really I had zero kind of real world experience in it. So anybody that's kind of hesitant about pitching a game, I feel like you might still be doubting yourself, but I feel like that's probably the best time to do something, because otherwise you're just going to be like me and just say maybe I'll just need to learn a little bit more and then I'll pitch something, or then I'll start something, but it'll never happen. Trust me, I'm 38. I've been thinking about doing this for 8 years. I wish I had started a lot sooner. So I'm really glad that I found Gamkedo. The reason that I pitched this game specifically was 2D and 3D adventure games kind of have been a pretty big part of the reasons I like video games. And so during my Roman's pitch, the Atari adventure game was one of the first things I brought up, because it was one of the first adventure games that I had ever played. It was really simple. And then Zelda was also a huge game when I was a kid. I played that for countless hours. Actually, Alone in the Dark actually was something I don't think I mentioned in the pitch. Even though it's not a top-down 2D adventure game, it's kind of, a lot of people acknowledge it as the first Resident Evil survival horror game. I still think about that game to this day, because it was kind of clunky, but it really had a huge impact on my perception of an adventure game. So yeah, that's basically it. All the genres, I probably relate to this one the most. So members involved, I really appreciate everybody kind of pitching in. It really wouldn't have come together without everybody's help. Everybody's contributions were really great. What I learned being a first-time programmer, first-time game developer, period. First thing I would say is beginning with a solid foundation with the game you're trying to pitch was probably pretty important. When Chris kind of approached me, he was just like, you want to pitch something this coming week? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then quickly realized that it probably would have been better if I had taken a week, refamiliarized myself with the JavaScript tutorials that I'd gone over with Chris, and then built a more solid demo from where I could have started Romans from, because basically I ended up spending the first week or two kind of just relearning JavaScript and figuring out what I was going to do. At the same time, I wouldn't overthink it too much. If you find yourself not getting motivated enough to put together some sort of basis for a pitch, you might just need that extra motivation of the club kind of looking at you and seeing what you've been doing for the entire week to move your game along. So it's pretty important to just take the plunge and pitch a game if that's what you want to do, or even if it's just a contribution towards a game that I feel like everybody here is incredibly nice. So I don't think there's any reason to not just do something that inspires you. I probably should have reached out to people a little sooner for help. It's hard to do something like that because one, it's the first game I've ever really worked on. So getting myself motivated and organizing, my day-to-day tasks was hard enough. So, asking that of others was pretty difficult as well. But looking back to it, had I motivated the team a little more and actually asked for specific help, as Chris had said numerous times throughout the thing, I probably would have gotten a lot more done with Romans. But live and learn. When I first reached out to Chris, I actually was looking for one-on-one help. He informed me about the club, which I wasn't aware of. So I was expecting to really get into this as as a solo project type thing. So starting a project that for the first time where there's like a team that you have to manage and schedules that you have to keep was kind of daunting, but I definitely see the reasons why many people work on games. If you do pitch a game, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to people. There's definitely plenty of people that would be willing to help you out, as you can see from the credit screen on Roman's Adventure. And then for the scope, when I thought of Roman's Adventure, I've listened to many people talk about game development. I've read a lot of people's stories and post-mortems, and everybody talks about scope creep and trying to keep scope small. So I kept that in mind with Romans, which is why the idea is actually pretty simple itself. But even from there, I ended up having to cut out some rooms from the top floor. And there are definitely not as many like items and power-ups that we had originally hoped for. It just didn't happen. There was just a lot of things that I didn't keep and didn't account for. Even being sick for a total of a week and a half throughout that thing, it's just something that I couldn't really predict. So the old saying of under promise and over deliver probably is maybe a good thing. Fortunately, Romans was a pretty modular game, so just removing rooms was not a big deal because all we had to do is just find out different places to put keys for the puzzles. But in a game where there might be some sort of linear story or something like that, removing parts of that story could be pretty terrible. Even if you plan out a small to medium-sized game, once you get into it, you might realize how large that game really is, which is how things kind of appeared to me. So once I realized how much I had actually promised myself, it was actually pretty daunting and kind of intimidating to realize that this could take twice as long as I originally thought. So anyways, just something to keep in mind. Biggest lesson I learned was, I'm reading some Harry Potter and this kind of spoke to me when I was reading it, but make sure that you schedule time out of every day if possible to work on your project. In the beginning, it was kind of I realized that I only have so much time in the day. So how I originally had planned it out was okay, I'll set these days out and 3 to 4 hours or whatever, how many hours of those days I'll just work, constantly on the game. And that was great. But problem was I was leaving too much of a gap between sessions. And again, not being an experienced programmer, there were just some things that when I would, if I taken off from Sunday to Wednesday and then, came back to it on Wednesday, just even the 2 days in between, I had to go back through the code to kind of familiarize with myself with what I was doing. Sometimes I just completely forgot where I was at or what goals I was trying to reach. So I had to start writing stuff down. So I quickly learned that, spreading work time out throughout the week, instead of 3 or 4 hours, maybe just 1 to 2 hours every day, really helped out because it was just, once you're kind of in that, once you kind of have that momentum going, it's a lot easier to come back the next day and work. Whereas opposed if you have 3 days off and come back and just are totally trying to figure out how object-oriented programming even works. So that was something that was really important things, and especially think for somebody that's new is, again, just not to take too much time off in between each session and to spread it out in smaller bits if you have to. And that's basically it.
Congrats all involved, which is about a third of the club members I think had fingers in it at some point, which is pretty great. Roman's Adventure wrapped up well. People can play it on the site. Someone from my first club had mentioned that 70% of the semesters he's been there has done some sort of Zelda-like thing, and they almost always run into trouble. And I think this came together much better than most attempts.